You already know what it is. It is a day after Super Tuesday. And of course, there's a lot to cover. There's a lot to talk about. Some people have lost hope. Some people hold out on hope. I am here to give you a realistic retelling of the events that took place yesterday. A lot of the Super Tuesday events, or a lot of the most significant Super Tuesday results, are already out. We have a pretty good understanding of where most states are going to be at, where they're going to arrive at. I'm going to go over those delegate numbers, who won, who lost. And after that, I'm going to talk to you, of course, about why there is no reason to be upset, or that there is no reason to be demoralized. We're going to talk about the weaknesses of the campaign, something that I've talked about a million times over. Something that you guys in my audience have criticized me for, which is the many weaknesses of the Bernie Sanders campaign. I think we're going to have to do an accurate reassessment of those things. We're going to talk about the many strengths of the Bernie Sanders campaign. We're going to talk about the positives and the negatives of what took place last night. And I'm going to, most importantly, give you as accurate of an analysis of what happened yesterday as I possibly can. Now, I might be bringing on some guests later as well. Hopefully, Ryan Grimm of The Intercept. Maybe I will be able to bring in Virgil Texas, the electoralist guru of the Chapo Trap House. These are people I've talked to and ask them to come on. We shall see. We shall see if they are available. I know Virgil said that he might try to log in from the airport, have a conversation with us. And I don't know if Ryan is available. We'll see. So, you doing good, Hassan? You left mad last night. Hope you're doing well. I'm doing really well. It took some time to readjust, but of course it's rather difficult to get my thoughts in order, get my feelings in order while I'm streaming about something that I'm very passionate about, obviously, something that I genuinely care about to, 20,000 to 30,000 people. It's very difficult to form it's very difficult to just level yourself out in that circumstance. But since then, I've reined it in a little bit, dialed myself back, looked at the entirety of the situation. And, well, first and foremost, it's not as bad as everyone thinks it is, but I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's not good either. My original assessment that I placed in the Discord secretly before Super Tuesday was best case scenario is Bernie Sanders comes out with a 200 delegate lead. Worst case scenario is Bernie Sanders comes out with a 10 to 50 delegate lead from Super Tuesday. Now, considering that Joe Biden overperformed in areas like Minnesota and Massachusetts, specifically in the Northwest, obviously that assessment has changed at this point. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's over. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that without a doubt that Joe Biden leaves Super Tuesday with a delegate lead. He will not. And by the way, that was the best case scenario for the 200. I'm just giving you my honest feedback. I'm giving you what my analysis was, and I'm giving you what I believed was going to happen, even though I don't feel the need to. I don't need to. I'd never openly stated this out in public. I talked about it in my own Discord, but I'm going to be as honest with you as possible. So let's get started. So what is happening right now is Joe Biden has a 65 delegate lead. Now, this is before we finish off California. California is at 90%, and this is mail-in ballots that have not been. 90% of precincts have reported in California, but there are still a tremendous amount of ballots that haven't been opened, the mail-in ballots, provisional ballots. So California is going to swing that difference probably drastically, considering that they have 415 total delegates. Sanders says urging Warren to drop out or attacks urging Warren to drop out are disgusting. Yeah, who cares? That's actually, I mean, he is correct that urging her to drop out is not disgusting, but attacking Elizabeth Warren right now is not politically smart. 100%. He is correct about that. And also he has to say that regardless, even though Elizabeth Warren is incredibly selfish for staying in the race. Knowing what we knew already was going to happen in Super Tuesday, it was definitely a selfish move. We're going to talk about that separately, though. He does need that endorsement, though. I will not sugarcoat it. That's actually one of the things we're going to talk about. Where should we start? Okay, I'm going to give you delegate analysis. What is slated to happen? What has happened? We're going to go through it all. Let's just talk about this really quickly. Okay, so I think you all are relatively familiar with what the events that took place were yesterday. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Originally, before the South Carolina results, and even leading up to this Super Tuesday race, Bernie Sanders was looking to leave Super Tuesday with a 400 delegate lead. And that was the analysis from 538. That was the analysis from most of these neoliberal outlets. That delegate lead closed up in a 72-hour media blitz. Now, the significance of that media blitz is something that we have to talk about. It is tremendously important, and it is something that I've only seen in another country like Turkey, where all of these outlets are straight up owned by wealthy people, oligarchs that directly are related or directly have financial ties to the government. Now, that doesn't happen in America. It's not as direct. There's more indirect. There's more of an indirect coalition in the United States of America. But the impact of that, the output of that was very similar. We will get to that in a second, though. But after that media blitz came in the first 72 hours, we saw a gigantic surge for Joe Biden, specifically in states like Virginia, which made no sense to analysts, which made no sense to people like myself, who are not the best at viewing polls and whatnot. But still, it was relatively surprising. Joe Biden ended up winning Virginia with 53% of the votes, and Bernie Sanders only got 23% there, which was relatively competitive. The southern states were always going to go to Joe Biden. Deep red states are always going to go to more conservative establishment Democrats. This is historically what has happened, or at least in recent years. In the past, like 20, 30 years, this is what happened. And that's what's going to continue happening, obviously. So that was a given, especially a state like Alabama, where the black electorate percentage is similar to South Carolina. That was also going to happen. These were immediate locks. So I'm going to tell you what areas I thought were going to be competitive races that I was wrong on, completely wrong on, and that Joe Biden overwhelmingly won. And that is North Carolina. Bernie Sanders only got 24% of the vote there, and Joe Biden got 43%. No one else got viability in the state of North Carolina. Now, that was remarkable. How much of that is the impact of South Carolina? I don't know, but that was supposed to be a tight race at probably 30%. Both of these candidates at 30%, yet Joe Biden definitely secured a significant margin of victory there. Maine was supposed to be a Bernie Sanders victory. Maine was supposed to be a lock for Bernie Sanders, and it did not pan out that way. Joe Biden ended up etching out a victory there by 2%. Maine is by the time Maine closes out, this margin is not going to change. Massachusetts again was another Bernie lock. Massachusetts probably was the most interesting win from my point of view, the most significant win that was awarded to Joe Biden with 33.6%. Bernie Sanders only getting 26%. Massachusetts is going to close out soon as well. That margin is not supposed to change. Joe Biden performed extremely well in these northeastern states where Bernie Sanders was supposed to win. Beyond that, Tennessee, again, understandable, but pretty good for Bernie Sanders to be competitive in those red states. Arkansas, understandable to go to Joe Biden, but again, over 20% for Bernie Sanders, so still relatively competitive in those states. Colorado, 36.2%, but unfortunately, Bloomberg came out of nowhere there. Bloomberg also reached viability in Arkansas and Tennessee. We're going to talk about Bloomberg separately in a brief moment, but Colorado went to Bernie Sanders by 36.2%. Now, that percentage might change a little bit more, depending on in favor of Bernie Sanders ultimately, but that's 77% of the precincts reporting at this point, with Joe Biden performing pretty well again in Colorado, all things considered. Minnesota and Texas, we'll get to Texas in a second. Minnesota obviously was going to go to Joe Biden, but Bernie Sanders did very well in Minnesota. Very well. Now, he reaching 30% in Minnesota was very good. If all things considered, Bernie Sanders performed the way that he did, above expectations in the South and according to expectations in the Northeast, this would have been a decisive victory for Bernie Sanders. As facts. But that did not happen. So Texas was another, unfortunately, Texas was another really sad situation where Bernie Sanders at 99% reporting. This margin might change a little bit, but Texas was won by Joe Biden at 34.5%. Sorry, that's what happened. Now, that's not good, but because of how competitive Bernie was in all the red states, and because of how competitive Bernie was in even states where Joe Biden won, except for very obvious ones like Alabama, this is ultimately still a very close race. As you can see here, the amount of delegates that have been rewarded at this point are 501 to Bernie Sanders and 566 to Joe Biden. So there's only a 65 delegate lead. This is nothing. I need to remind all of you that post Super Tuesday, Barack Obama, Bardock, Hassan, no bummer, had only an 18-point delegate lead post Super Tuesday when all of the results came in. Okay? Only an 18-point lead. So, I mean, he ended up winning, but it was a very close race, even after Super Tuesday, with an establishment candidate running against another candidate that was very progressive and was still at that point kind of able to capture the black vote, but still had very competitive races against Hillary Clinton because the establishment was still in support of Hillary Clinton and had not fully shifted over to Bardock, no bummer. Now we get to the final prize, the grand prize, the crown jewel, the state of California, my state, the beautiful state of California. I am very proud of all the people that went out in California and knocked on doors, my friends, people that I know. Thank God that they did what they did. Thank God for the Elizabeth Warren fans in the state of California that decided that it was probably not the best thing to do to vote for Elizabeth Warren at a time when it seemed like any vote for Elizabeth Warren that gets her to viability would essentially be a vote for Joe Biden. Thank God that they switched their minds. They changed their minds with Bernie Sanders at 33%. Now, this is going to change. I mean, 90% in California. We have 2 more weeks. At least we have 2 more weeks of information that's going to come out of California. There's still people that were delivering their mail-in ballots as early as yesterday. Some of those mail-in ballots are not going to reach their final destination for another week. So, of course, the state of California always is going to be late in delivering results, but it also has 415 delegates, which is the most delegates afforded to anyone. In that race. That's 33% of the delegates from Super Tuesday as a overall. Joe Biden being competitive at 25% might change. He might actually increase his percentage, but ultimately a big chunk of that is going to go to Bernard Sanders, and that will greatly change this balance here that you see.
Feels burn, man.
Even if it was a 65 delegate lead that Joe Biden ends up winning Super Tuesday with, ultimately the delegate lead is pretty small. A Bernie Sanders 50-point delegate lead, 10 to 50-point delegate lead, as I said, was the worst case scenario in which this would have been an incredibly competitive race. It's the exact same for Joe Biden as well. Obviously, Joe Biden, however, has a lot of advantages that Bernie Sanders does not have, but it's still an incredibly competitive race with the Rust Belt coming up, with states like Michigan, with Bernie Sanders definitely going to compete very well. No matter what happens, depending on how the delegates are distributed in the state of California, what we will most likely see is this lead narrowing, and there is still a very realistic chance of Bernie Sanders having more delegates at the end of Super Tuesday in the next couple of weeks. Obviously, at that point, Michigan will have voted. There's a couple other states that are coming up right now that all will have voted by then, so it will be inconsequential. But ultimately, there's a very realistic chance that Bernie Sanders ended up winning Super Tuesday with a very, very slim margin of delegate leads. But it doesn't matter at this point, because what matters is the narrative, which is precisely what I want to get to. What happened in the past 75 hours will most likely be talked about for a very long time. The race drastically changed. It shifted completely. What happened in the past 75 hours was incredible leading up to Super Tuesday. I mean, it was so perplexing that most of the analysts also could not foresee exactly how the outcomes were going to look like. We saw it coming because we are skeptics here and we're pessimists. It far superseded expectations, even. Expectations of the biggest neoliberal shills, rather. So here is what the problem is, right? One element that I have hyper focused on since the beginning of the primaries, it's the area that I care most about, and that's media analysis, because I am a media consuming animal. I love watching MSNBC, as you guys know, and malding. I love watching CNN and malding, and the media is incredibly powerful. Okay, incredibly powerful. And what I mean by that is something I want to show you here. I'm going to show you some numbers that are going to change your minds about the Super Tuesday recap and the events that took place in the past 2.5, 3 news cycles, okay? Since in the aftermath of Joe Biden winning South Carolina. According to Kevin Cate, who is a progressive consultant and ad maker, the analysis from Critical Mention, which is a real-time media monitoring platform, between South Carolina polls closing on Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern on Super Tuesday, Joe Biden earned $71,992,629 worth of almost entirely positive national media. Add local media in those markets, and it easily tops $100 million worth of earned media in 72 hours. Almost all of it positive. Now, earned media is a technical term. I know that a lot of people get mad at that, but it is a technical term in marketing. Earned media just simply means you did something and you earned the coverage. Obviously, it was handed to Joe Biden, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But for example, if Elizabeth Warren came out after talking to Bernie Sanders tonight and endorsed Bernie Sanders, and the media started covering it, that would be considered earned media. Positive, negative, doesn't matter. That would still be considered earned media. So don't get too caught up on that technicality. I think it's funny that it's called earned media in this circumstance, but it is what it is. Now, on top of that, there's also paid media. Now, earned media, especially when it's positive earned media, is way more impactful than paid media. To put Super Tuesday results into perspective, we are going to go back to the analysis here in 1 second. But Bloomberg spent $500 million in ads over 2 months. $500 million. Incredible ad spend, right? Everyone was talking about how crazy this is. Joe Biden, as I just showed you, got 1/5 of that and $100 million plus worth of earned media or free media in just 2 days. Now, a lot of people will tell you Bloomberg dropped out and he didn't perform well. That was $500 million. Ha ha ha. But ultimately, I need you to look at these numbers, because Michael Bloomberg was supposed to have 0% in this entire race. But look what $500 million was able to get him in Super Tuesday states. Are you ready? 9.4% in Vermont, 9.8% in Virginia, 13% in North Carolina. These are double digits. We're getting into double digits and near double digits in these states. 11.7% in Alabama, 12% in Maine, 11.8%, almost 12% in Massachusetts, 13.9%, almost 14% in Oklahoma, 15% in Tennessee. So for everyone who's saying that ad spend was so unsuccessful, he threw it away, in the grand scheme of things, if his goal was to help Biden out, yes, that was a massive failure. And yes, we can talk about the incompetence of billionaires and how it's not a meritocratic approach and how meritocracy is a lie and Michael Bloomberg just, lit money on fire, but it doesn't matter because it's not even 1% of his wealth. Certainly. But what I need you to understand here is what a difference media makes, what a difference media coverage makes for you. Now, earned media is already more valuable than paid media, because one is ads and you have diminishing returns, and the other is earned media, which is native advertising. Basically, it functionally operates as like objective coverage, even though it's not. Michael Bloomberg was able to get effectively this much for $500 million over the course of 2 months. Can you imagine the gigantic surge that $100 million plus of positive coverage for 72 hours gave Joseph Robinette Biden? Now, there's a lot of analysis to be made here. Bernie Sanders wasn't able to captivate a larger percentage of the youth vote that he thought was going to turn out. That's a fact. Bernie Sanders still has a long way to go in the South, especially with the black demographic, the black vote. That's a fact. Bernie Sanders didn't do a good enough job or hasn't done a good enough job with with increasing his turnout or increasing his vote share. That's also a fact. Getting 50.8% in Vermont is terrible. Allowing Joseph Robinette Biden to get 22% in Vermont, although it's a small percentage of delegates, a tiny amount of delegates that he's going to get from there, is still indicative of something that went wrong. Now, what went wrong though? Because it's not like Bernie Sanders hasn't been doing field organizing. He has in all of these states. Okay? A tremendous amount of field organizing for months. A lot of groundwork. A lot of grassroots support. And he's also been able to raise money from these areas. So what went wrong? Most significantly, blaming Elizabeth Warren is not going to actually help us arrive at the reality here. Now, would Elizabeth Warren have helped? Certainly. A lot more than Joe Biden would have gotten help from Michael Bloomberg if Michael Bloomberg had dropped out. Especially because the distribution of votes for Michael Bloomberg was even in comparison to Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren has a lot more Bernie Sanders second choice voters than Michael Bloomberg has with Joe Biden. But field organizing and ad spend, which is how you're normally supposed to run campaigns, was nothing in the face of significant endorsements that Joe Biden got from people within these institutions, people within these communities, and no campaigning whatsoever, and almost no ad spend whatsoever in these states, with $100 million of free media coverage that he got in the last 72 hours. Now, if you asked voters in the exit polls, a lot of them said that they changed their minds recently in the last couple of days, because a lot of these people were waiting for someone that the media would finally say that's their guy. Do you believe that Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar genuinely thought that Joe Biden was the most electable all of a sudden after winning one state, where they were like, all right, it's time? No, he just had institutional politics on lock, and that he was finally seen as the guy that they could launch their support behind, so they coalesced behind him. Maybe there was a little bit of persuasion behind closed doors as well. Now, this is widely reported, that Barack Obama, for example, gave a call to Pete Buttigieg. He didn't directly tell him drop out and endorse Joe Biden, but he told him this is your best opportunity for leverage. How much of that swayed Pete Buttigieg's opinion? Who knows? Who's to say? But if you were to think that this was not coordinated and that this was not deliberate, well, I got a bridge to sell you. The reason why Barack Obama did not endorse Joe Biden outright before Super Tuesday was because I'm fairly certain that he also did not know how well Joe Biden would come out of Super Tuesday. And these results aren't even all that great for Joe Biden. I mean, the fact that he's only secured a 65-point delegate lead with all of the media support, with three other presidential candidates endorsing him in sequence 24 hours before Super Tuesday, and this is the best results he got. Well, that's because he's not a great candidate. One of the more significant problems with the Bernie Sanders campaign is that he does not play the game. It's a dirty game of politics, but he does not play institutional politics well. He only does activist politics. He only does labor organizer politics. And labor organizer politics would be great at a time if the labor unions were strong, where he would actually command a gigantic chunk of the Democratic electorate. But labor unions aren't strong. We even got to see how labor unions, when they're not strong, get into a position where they want to defend themselves and make calculated decisions, like the culinary union labor bosses. The rank and file still went with Bernie Sanders in Nevada, but the culinary union labor bosses and the compounding media coverage for the next 3 cycles in Nevada made it seem like the culinary union was under attack by Bernie bros. Well, what happened? Why did the overwhelming majority of the culinary union rank and file end up voting for Bernie Sanders? Because it's a lie. because it's a narrative. It's one way that you can attack the front runner in that circumstance. And that's precisely what's been happening nonstop. And that will continue to happen. Okay, so I'm not here to feed you nonsense. I'm not here to lie to you and say it's all going to be bread and roses going forward. It's not. This is going to be a hard fight. But we're not out of this fight. As a matter of fact, we have a very high likelihood of winning this fight still. It just depends on, it's completely reliant on you not losing hope in the way that the media would want you to, in the way that Joe Biden supporters would want you to, in the way that establishment Democrats would want you to. Because unlike Joe Biden's campaign, we can't rely on the charitability of large donors, okay? It's a people-powered movement. All we have is each other in this circumstance. All we have are people, average Americans like you, your friends, your family members, those that went out and knocked on doors, those that went out and organized, those that went out and spread the good word and tried to combat the overwhelming media narrative. That's truth. So if you get demoralized now, well, that's defeat. And they want you to get demoralized now. They want you to give up, okay? To lay down and take it. But we're not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to keep fighting. Because like I mentioned before, in 2016, the outcomes were drastically different at this point. Now, there were some positives to the 2016 race. Hillary Clinton was deeply unlikable, as evidenced by the fact that Bernie Sanders won an overwhelming amount of anti-Hillary votes in the Democratic primaries. And that's a consequence of, I don't know, 40 years or 30 years of entire industries built up on attacking the Clinton name. Some for good reason, some for bad. Another reason why that was a better race because it was already tight from the jump. But the positives to look at here, the advantages that Bernie has now is that he is way more organized and has a people-backed movement. And most importantly, he has better name recognition. This is not a campaign in disarray anymore. He's well-liked. He is better slated to defeat Donald Trump than Joe Biden is, especially in battleground states. He has a better track record. And Joe Biden is still a very weak candidate. Now, Joe Biden is not as deeply and intensely disliked as Hillary Clinton was, certainly. I mean, he has the Obama era to rely on. Before Barack Obama, Joe Biden would have been a nobody. It's just some random conservative Democrat that really pushed the party to enact some really draconian measures that harmed the African-American community and the Latino community. But post-Obama, he's still relatively well-liked. He has name recognition, and he offers a pathway of stability, a return to normalcy. Okay? He's not as intensely disliked as Hillary Clinton, but he's also senile. And that's facts. No matter what happens, you cannot deny that. And his senile status implies that he is not as electable as the media tries to portray him to be. The media will try to say it's ableist and that he's stuttering, but that's not the case. We all know what the reality is. Don't make me go over the thread of all the times that he has lost his mind very clearly on camera. Don't make me rehash the time that his campaign early on decided to pull him back from additional stops when he messed up what state he was in New Hampshire and thought it was Vermont. Come on. His own campaign stated, a campaign staffer of Joe Biden stated that he would lose his rigor after the sun had set. Okay? In many words, they basically were saying that he was sundowning, okay? In the best way possible. Now, beyond that, he doesn't really have any policies that are discernible. Okay? So even on the optics end, Joe Biden, not a very good candidate. On the policy front, Joe Biden, also not a very good candidate. People will, of course, turn around and tell you, oh man, well, Joe Biden is the front runner. Why are you attacking him? You know, you're the reason why he's going to look less electable in the general. No. Okay? That's insane. If you think that, if you're not paying attention to Donald Trump and what he has started doing already, then you're an idiot. Okay? Donald Trump has already started talking about Sleepy Joe. Donald Trump has already started a congressional investigation into Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and Burisma. That is going to be the emails of 2020. What Hillary Clinton did was run against Donald Trump when Donald Trump was fighting for institutional power within within the Republican Party. And they coalesced behind him. They got behind him in the general, of course. But Joe Biden is going up against someone who has 4 years of whipping the Republican Party and delivering them pretty good results. Someone who can and has shown a willingness to utilize the executive authorities and the power that he currently holds to his advantage to win re-election, whether it be the Ukrainian developments that got him impeached in the House, or the current Biden investigation that is ramping up. So if you think that that's not going to be harmful to Joe Biden, who is already senile and virtually incapable of defending himself, you're a fool. The media can hide Joe Biden's flubs all they want, but Fox News is not going to be as charitable. Fox News is not going to carry Joe Biden in the same way that the media has thus far. And for those of you who say, why are you bringing that up? Why are you bringing Joe Biden's senility up as he's now the front runner? Where was that take when the entirety of media were red baiting Bernie Sanders, who hadn't talked about Cuba at all, that they had brought up through hit pieces? Where was that when the entirety of media were saying Bernie Sanders hasn't been vetted yet? Bernie Sanders hasn't been vetted yet, when he had been vetted already. They were just saying that they couldn't attack him well enough. Where were those calls to stop everyone from attacking Bernie Sanders when establishment Democrats were offering speaking points, talking points to the New York Times, talking about how they wanted to push for a brokered convention? The reason why I'm mentioning this, because you didn't hear me say, wow, that's really messed up. I can't believe they're doing that. I mean, I did criticize it a bit, but you never heard me say, oh, this is really hurting Bernie's electability, because I'm a realist. I know that that was always going to be the case, but they are not. Neoliberals believe that they have a right to get positive coverage only for Joe Biden, and they have a right to ensure that Joe Biden is not attacked at all. But then any other primary challenger or any other challenger in general is actually, if they're attacking from the left, is actually an aberration that needs to be removed from the party. I mean, they compared him to Hitler once a day for an entire week. So, like I said, there is plenty of reason to stay hopeful. Bernie Sanders is finally attacking Joe Biden, which is good. Very long. It took a very, very long time for him to start doing this. This will probably start getting him some media coverage. They have to cover this. I mean, they have literal campaign. They have journalists on the campaign trail specifically so that Bernie says some stuff like this so he can get some media placements. If they don't cover it at all, it's disgusting. What I'm afraid here, and he should have done this so long ago, and not just on the 60 billionaires, because that's not the best message, but on his track record. And he is doing that now, talking about Social Security, talking about his Iraq vote, which was disastrous, talking about how he cheerleaded the Iraq war, talking about how he had a 20-year streak of trying to cut Social Security spending. And what he should do also is talk about how that's going to play out against Donald Trump in the general. He's not going to attack his dementia. That would be the unacceptable moment. But he should specifically talk about how, this is going to, maybe he should even bring up the investigations that make him a weaker candidate. Bernie started running ads where Obama is propping him up as though Obama endorsed him. Also good. He should be doing that. He should be playing both sides. On the one hand, he should be running ads nonstop about how Obama loves him. And on the other side, he should be attacking the establishment and showcasing his differences between himself and Joe Biden. He needs to get earned media more than anything, which is precisely why I've been begging Bernie to be more combative against Biden, to force the conversation to feature Biden's obvious flaws. Because if he were to attack Joe Biden to showcase his differences, even if the media coverage showed that Bernie Sanders was bad, even if they were like, Bernie Sanders is saying Joe Biden wanted to cut Social Security, it doesn't matter. Because all of a sudden, millions of people are like, wait a minute, did Joe Biden actually try to cut Social Security? And that's a positive. That's the only thing we can do at this point. The electability shield that Biden has currently is totally manufactured by the media. And it will wither away. It's barely getting him over the finish line right now, but it will get wiped out in its entirety when he has to match up against Donald Trump and the entirety of right-wing media. Donald Trump with a tremendous amount of money, by the way. Tremendous amount of money that he has raised because he's been campaigning since day one. Now, there are certain things that I'm afraid of that the media will do. Nate Silver says, can the momentum in the Democratic race shift again? Well, yes, obviously, but Biden's delegate lead may be non-trivial depending on where we end up in California. In the short term, Biden will probably gain further ground in polls as a result of last night. Also, while I want to look at this in more detail, at first glance, it seems like the remaining big delegate states are not great for Sanders, or put in a way, California and Texas were the best big delegate states for Bernie, and now they're done voting. He's right. You have Florida coming up. You have Georgia coming up. These are going to be states that most likely go to Joe Biden. So much so that, like, the Florida Democratic Party tried to petition to get Bernie Sanders off the ballot and concern troll and virtue signal about Castro for exactly what Barack Obama had said about Castro. Barack Obama is the most popular politician in the Democratic Party. He said the exact same things about Castro. The big races that are coming up, some of them look really good for Bernie, even though Biden is performing well in those states. Others look really good for Biden, and he will get a lot of delegates from those states. Now, that delegate lead could increase tremendously, and that Joe Biden might get plurality. In which case, while I still believe that Bernie Sanders is a better candidate than Joe Biden to defeat Donald Trump, in which case there's nothing you can do. Okay? Nothing you can do about that. He will definitely, in which case, if he has plurality, it's a wrap. The Democratic Party will have effectively put forward, once again, a weaker candidate against Donald Trump. Because that candidate performed well in deep red states, he literally hammered on that over and over again. Not only that, but if you don't believe my words, listen to Donald Trump's words. He's coherent enough to realize this sort of thing. When he was talking to Lev Parnas, one of the most revealing things that came out of that Ukraine impeachment was, in a private conversation recorded by Lev Parnas, Donald Trump openly states Bernie Sanders is going to be a tough opponent if Hillary Clinton picks him up as her VP because of his opinions on trade, because of how similar their opinions are on trade. I thought the turnout increased in Virginia because they switched from a caucus to a normal primary. Yeah. So, that's the other thing. Sorry. So a big reason why turnout increased tremendously in a lot of states was because I think in 4 states, they went from a caucus to a primary. Of course, turnout's going to increase. It's more democratic, and good thing it is. Sorry, that's facts. I don't give a shit if Bernie loses in all of the primary states, but it's a more democratic process. Just like there would have been an even a larger increased turnout in places like Texas if the Voting Rights Act was not gutted by the Supreme Court and then subsequently plenty of polling places closed in Texas, especially in Latino communities, especially in Black communities. This kind of exposes the Biden turnout narrative, though, because his voting system. Yeah, no, it's not. Anyone who claims that people overwhelmingly voted for Joe Biden because, like, they were really excited for Joe Biden this entire time are morons, or they're lying to you. One or the other, doesn't matter. Functionally, it's all the same. Okay? Sorry, guys. Come on. Like, as honest as I am, as brutally honest as I am with you about Bernie Sanders' chances, which I think are not looking too great, but still, there is a lot of reason to hold out hope and not lose hope at all. And as someone who's very honest about Bernie Sanders' weaknesses since day one, and has criticized them since day one because of how he understands what institutional control demands and what the media demands from him, what he has to do to be able to get earned media, and refuses to do it for a very long time. As someone who's honest about those things, I'm also going to be honest about Joe Biden's electability and lack thereof, rather. And also And also beyond that, how like what are the reasons why Joe Biden got this incredible round of success out of nowhere? So, I mean, where was this turnout? Where was this mobilization? Joe Biden didn't do a single thing to mobilize people. He had to rely on the media to carry him. I'm sorry. That's the truth. If you think that $100 million of earned media was not the carrying factor, and on top of that, 3 additional presidential candidates that ran against him, endorsing him simultaneously, and then that being shown as like the comeback kid narrative, that playing into that comeback kid narrative, and Americans finally willingness to figure out that there's someone that they can back, as they consistently said Bernie Sanders was not electable, and that played the biggest reasons for why people voted. Now Bernie Sanders is playing the game dirty a little bit. Finally,
that's right. Feel the burn.
I'm Bernie Sanders, and I approve this message.
There's more stuff. There's gonna be more stuff of like Barack Obama seemingly endorsing Bernie when he hasn't. He needs to halt Biden's momentum. He needs to get media moments. He needs to create media moments. If you've been following me since the beginning of these primaries, you know that I've been saying my man has to get clip chimps on his side. He needs to get LSF coverage. Now, there aren't any debates. I find that to be relatively suspicious, that there are no debates between now and the next round of elections. That's a little weird, especially considering at certain points there were 2 debates in between elections. It's kind of wild. Now, who controls the debates? Who do you guys think controls the debates? The DNC, of course. So, for a lot of uninformed voters or a lot of uninformed people on the internet, of course, that comes across as like, oh my God, a big conspiracy. But this is the whole point of the DNC. Like they're supposed to create an element of fairness in their elections, but ultimately decide who gets to go up against the Republican Party. That's it. That's what they're here for. They have argued this in courts. Now, there is also a weakness. There's also a weakness there from the Bernie camp, which actually is something that I wanted to talk about. So let's get into it. I think that's a good segue to talk about Bernie Sanders' obvious flaws. Majority Whip Jim Clyburn, the kingmaker who has endorsed every single candidate that has become the president, that has gone on to secure the Democratic nomination. Bernie Sanders did not go after him for an endorsement, despite the fact that they've worked productively together for years, but actively did not seek his endorsement. House Majority Whip James Clyburn has had many productive conversations with Senator Bernie Sanders during their shared years in Congress, but when it came to seeking the influential South Carolina's endorsement, the Vermont senator didn't make a concerted effort. Now, the Daily Beast is Oppo Research. It's a Chelsea Clinton operation for the most part, and they write god-awful articles. But I have no reason not to believe this, looking at the way that Bernie Sanders has done politics so far, looking at how Bernie Sanders' campaign has done politics so far. This is institutional politics that you have to do. You have to engage in it. Now, that might look good for a lot of guys like us who look at how corrupt this establishment is, okay? But you got to be sneaky, okay? You got to cut deals. Sometimes you don't give up on your moral conviction, and you don't give up on your overarching message. You don't give up on your policies, but you have to sometimes kiss some hands, okay? Kiss the ring. Because, unfortunately, you can't just believe in the electorate. You can't just believe in the momentum of people. It's not going to get you far enough, especially in the Democratic primaries. It might get you further in the general, and it certainly will, because that's when people coalesce and people activate, and more people start paying attention, and the battle lines are drawn. This is my candidate of the Democratic Party. This is who I'm going to vote for. People that want to vote against Donald Trump, that are waiting for someone to just become the nominee, are going to get after it and finally start coming out to vote and support their candidate. But in the Democratic primary, you have people who are still very low information voters, of course, because most voters are low information or single issue voters. But they are going to they're going to pay attention to MSNBC, they're going to pay attention to CNN, and they're going to pay attention to their community leaders. And if you're a community leader that you have trusted your life with, that has fought for your rights, at a time when there was segregation, says that this is my guy, it doesn't matter if that guy said the N-word even. You know what I mean? If tomorrow a tape came out with Joe Biden saying the N-word in the 1960s, it wouldn't matter. I'm sorry, that's the truth. I mean, he's done much worse things than say the N-word, guys. He's done much worse things than say the N-word. It's obvious. Most Southern black people think it's better to go with the devil you know than the one you don't. Yeah. And most importantly, though, Joe Biden has been in these communities as the vice president of Barack Obama. He has visited these communities for years. He's been by their side through thick and thin. He's visited these communities after they got hit with hateful attacks, like white national attacks in churches. He was there. He was there for them. That matters. Clyburn acknowledged the outreach didn't go much beyond that. I had a lot of conversations with almost every one of the candidates, he said, referencing nearly 24 candidates, including Sanders, who attended his world-famous fish fry in Colombia in June. But Clyburn acknowledged the outreach didn't go much beyond that. I don't need to be courted, but he does wield a tremendous influence in South Carolina and also in most of these red states with the African-American populations. He's their guy. So I personally think that this is a gigantic weakness of the Sanders campaign, not playing the institutional politics game. You got to do that. You got to do that. I like him for not doing that because that, to me, is honesty. He doesn't play that game. But at a time when we're seeing that playing the field, doing field organizing, and trying to activate the American electorate in the primaries as you would in the general or as you would as a labor organizer is not working. Part of that is because we don't have the infrastructure to activate and mobilize and inform millions of Americans. I don't think Elizabeth Warren will drop out for anything short of a VP endorsement. And I don't know if that's something to do at this point. Elizabeth Warren has two options here. So this actually fits perfectly with what I wanted to talk about anyway. So let's talk about it. So Elizabeth Warren she has a number of different options here. Okay? So what she can do in this circumstance is drop out and not endorse Bernie Sanders. That would be a clear move for the Biden campaign. That would imply to me, at least, and other people, that she cut a deal with Joe Biden. And in her mind, it will be about maybe getting some bankruptcy bills or maybe getting some position of power. Maybe it should be a czar, something like that. You know what I mean? Like an administrative role in the Biden presidency. Elizabeth Warren could not drop out at all. Okay? Not drop out at all and eat away at Bernie's base as best as she can, which is outright helping Joe Biden, even more than if she dropped out and didn't endorse Bernie Sanders. Anything short of an endorsement of Bernie Sanders is an implication that Elizabeth Warren is very likely working with the Biden campaign for a cabinet role or administrative position, or at least like pushing her agenda. That will be her justification. Warren could just drop out and endorse Biden? Yes. Warren could also drop out and endorse Biden, but that is a little unrealistic. Maybe I'm wrong, but that would mean that Biden gave her like a VP position or something, which I don't think that would happen. No, it's terrible, dude. No, that's too petty. Elizabeth Warren is currently courting both Biden and Bernie Sanders, okay? Trying to play both sides. Not a very progressive thing to do. What did I tell you? What is her justification? Who here remembers? Her justification is going to be if she ends up endorsing Biden or not endorsing Bernie, which is basically an endorsement of Biden, or staying in the race and not endorsing Bernie, obviously, which is another endorsement of Biden. Why would she do that? To claim that, well, this is the only way that we can get the job done. I want to unite this country. And the only way to unite this country and maybe pass some progressive legislation is by doing politics and working with Joe Biden. Also, the other thing is, Elizabeth Warren endorsing Bernie helps him significantly, but I think Elizabeth Warren endorsing Joe Biden helps Joe Biden a lot more, because then in the general, they can say, oh, then in the general, they could get at least some of those soft liberals who are like, well, at least Elizabeth Warren is endorsed her, or at least Elizabeth Warren is, depending on if she gets VP or not.